Dr. Sarah chin pressed her eye against the microscope. Lens for the third time. That evening her coffee growing. Cold beside stacks of lab reports. The samples from the rural town of Millbrook had arrived that morning with an urgent note from the CDC field team, but what she observed defied every principle of virology that she'd learned in her 15-year career. The cellular structures weren't just dying, they were transforming into something entirely foreign, something that shouldn't exist in nature. Miles away. In Millbrook, Sheriff Tom Bradley received his fourth missing persons report in 2 days. The Hendersons hadn't been seen since Tuesday, and their neighbor Mrs. Patterson swore she'd heard strange scratching sounds coming from their basement the night before. Tom had initially dismissed the reports as typical small-town paranoia, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. People were disappearing, and those who remained spoke in hushed tones about shadows moving through the cornfields after dark. The transformation had begun 3 weeks earlier when a meteorite crashed into the woods outside Millbrook. Dr. Marcus Webb, a geologist from the State University, had been the first to examine the impact site. The rock itself seemed ordinary enough, but the soil around it had developed an unusual phosphorescent quality that made his Geiger counter click with unusual frequency. What he couldn't have known was that microscopic organisms within the meteorite had already begun their silent invasion of the local ecosystem. Sarah's laboratory phone rang, jarring her from her observations. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Rebecca Foster from the Atlanta CDC headquarters, and her tone carried an urgency that made Sarah's pulse quicken. Similar samples had arrived from 6 other rural communities across 3 states, all within a 100-mile radius of meteorite impact sites. The pattern was undeniable now. Something was spreading, and it was spreading fast. In Millbrook, the first visible signs of the outbreak emerged during the town's annual Harvest Festival. Mayor Robert Kim had insisted the celebration continue despite the recent disappearances, believing that normalcy would calm the growing anxiety among residents. The festival grounds buzzed with families enjoying carnival rides and local vendors selling homemade pies, but the atmosphere changed when young Timothy Walsh noticed his missing neighbor, Mr. Harrison, shambling between the food booths with an unsettling gait and vacant, milky eyes. The screams began when Harrison lunged at Mrs. Cooper, the librarian, with inhuman speed and strength. His fingernails had grown into claw-like appendages, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor that seemed to absorb the festival's colorful lights. Sheriff Bradley arrived within minutes, but by then chaos had erupted throughout the fairgrounds. Harrison wasn't alone. Other missing townspeople had emerged from the surrounding cornfields, moving with the same predatory purpose. Sarah watched the news reports from her laboratory with growing horror. The footage from Millbrook showed scenes that belonged in a nightmare, not in the peaceful farming community she'd visited during her graduate studies. The infected individuals displayed incredible resilience, continuing to pursue their targets even after sustaining injuries that should have been incapacitating. Military units were already being deployed to establish a quarantine perimeter, but Sarah feared they were already too late. The biological samples under her microscope told a story of unprecedented cellular hijacking. The mysterious organisms were rewriting DNA sequences with surgical precision, preserving motor functions while systematically shutting down higher brain activity. The result was a human body operating on pure predatory instinct, driven by an insatiable hunger for living flesh. More disturbing still, the organisms seemed to be evolving rapidly, adapting to overcome each defensive mechanism the human immune system deployed against them. As night fell across the country, similar outbreaks erupted in the other affected communities. Emergency broadcasts crackled across radio frequencies, urging citizens to remain indoors and avoid contact with anyone displaying unusual behavior. The National Guard established roadblocks on major highways, but reports were already coming in from larger cities where infected individuals had spread beyond the initial quarantine zones. Dr. Foster's second call came at midnight, her voice strained with exhaustion and fear. The president had been briefed, and a national emergency was being declared. Research facilities across the country were being mobilized to find a solution, but the preliminary data suggested they were facing something far beyond a typical viral outbreak. The organisms seemed to be operating with a collective intelligence, coordinating their spread with an efficiency that suggested either advanced evolution or deliberate design. Sarah stared at her reflection in the laboratory window, seeing the lights of the city beyond and wondering how many of those buildings would still be occupied by morning. The samples before her represented more than just a medical crisis. They were evidence of humanity's first encounter with something that challenged their position at the top of the food chain. The world was about to change in ways that would test every survival instinct the human species possessed, and Sarah realized that her small laboratory might be one of the last bastions of hope in a war that was only just beginning. The reinforced steel barriers surrounding Millbrook had held for exactly 72 hours before the first breach occurred. General Patricia Morrison watched through binoculars as her supposedly impenetrable containment zone dissolved into chaos, the infected moving with a coordination that defied every military protocol she'd studied during her 30-year career. They weren't mindlessly throwing themselves against the barriers, they were testing them, probing for weaknesses with an intelligence that sent chills down her spine. Dr. Chin had barely slept since arriving at the temporary CDC field station, her team working around the clock to analyze samples from the expanding outbreak zones. The electromagnetic readings from her latest experiments revealed something extraordinary. The organisms weren't just parasites, they were receivers, responding to specific frequencies that seemed to originate from the meteorite impact sites. When she adjusted her equipment to broadcast on the same wavelength, the infected tissue samples became docile, their aggressive cellular behavior temporarily suppressed. 300 miles away in Chicago, firefighter Jake Martinez had watched his city transform overnight. The first infected had appeared in the downtown district during rush hour, their appearance so normal that commuters had simply stepped around them on the sidewalks. By midnight, entire city blocks had become hunting grounds for creatures that retained human memories but had lost all trace of human compassion. Jake had gathered survivors in the old firehouse, barricading the doors and windows while coordinating with other emergency responders who'd managed to establish similar safe havens across the metropolitan area. The military's confidence in their containment strategy began crumbling when surveillance drones captured footage of infected individuals working together to dismantle the barrier systems. They used tools, communicated through a series of clicking sounds, and displayed tactical awareness that suggested they were learning from each engagement. General Morrison found herself fighting an enemy that adapted faster than her forces could respond, their advantage in numbers growing with each passing hour. Captain Elena Rodriguez had been leading a reconnaissance mission outside Denver when the outbreak reached the city limits. Her unit had been cut off from command, forced to fight their way through infected hordes that seemed to anticipate their every move. But Elena possessed something that made her invaluable in this new world: an intuitive understanding of guerrilla warfare and an ability to inspire hope in the darkest circumstances. She'd begun gathering scattered military personnel and civilians, establishing fortified positions in abandoned warehouses and shopping centers. Dr. Chen's breakthrough came during her fourth consecutive night in the laboratory. The electromagnetic signature she'd been tracking wasn't random, it was structured, almost like a form of communication. The organisms were networked, sharing information across vast distances through some kind of biological transmission system. When she demonstrated her findings to General Morrison, the implications became terrifyingly clear. They weren't fighting isolated infected individuals, they were battling components of a larger intelligence. In the underground subway tunnels beneath New York City, Transit Authority Supervisor Maria Santos had become an unlikely leader of resistance operations. The infected seemed hesitant to venture into the deep tunnels, giving her group of survivors a temporary advantage. They'd established communication networks using the existing infrastructure, coordinating supply runs and rescue operations while staying hidden from the chaos above. Maria's engineering background proved invaluable as they modified the tunnel systems into defensible positions. The first major safe zone established under Captain Rodriguez's leadership was a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. The Aurora Mall outside Denver had been transformed into a self-sufficient fortress, its multiple levels and strategic choke points making it ideal for defense. Elena had organized the survivors into specialized units. Medical personnel tended to the wounded, engineers reinforced the structure, and combat teams conducted carefully planned supply runs. Her leadership style balanced military discipline with civilian cooperation, creating a model that other survivor groups began to emulate. Dr. Chen's electromagnetic research yielded an unexpected discovery when she attempted to disrupt the organism's communication network. The infected individuals within range of her experimental transmitter didn't just become docile, they began to show signs of their former human consciousness returning. For brief moments, the alien influence seemed to weaken, allowing the original personality to surface. The implications were staggering. The infected might not be lost after all, but trapped within their own bodies. As dawn broke over the transformed landscape, emergency broadcasts from government officials painted a grim picture. The quarantine zones had failed in 7 states, and infected populations were spreading toward major urban centers with alarming speed. The president's address to the nation carried an unprecedented warning. Citizens should prepare for the possibility that normal life might not return for months, possibly years. Elena's radio crackled with reports from other safe zones across the country. The Aurora Mall had become a beacon of hope, its success inspiring similar fortifications in dozens of other locations. But the reports also carried sobering news. The infected were evolving, displaying new behaviors that suggested they were adapting to human defensive strategies. The war for survival had only just begun, and humanity would need to evolve just as quickly if they hoped to reclaim their world from an enemy that seemed to learn from every encounter. The revelation came to Dr. Webb at 3:47 a.m. while reviewing satellite imagery from the 12 meteorite impact sites across North America. The pattern wasn't random, it was geometric, forming a precise spiral that covered nearly half the continent. Each impact point was equidistant from the others, positioned with mathematical precision that suggested advanced planning rather than cosmic coincidence. Webb's hands trembled as he traced the pattern on his computer screen, realizing that humanity had been deliberately targeted by an intelligence far superior to their own. In the Aurora Mall, Captain Rodriguez noticed the change in the infected's behavior during their morning reconnaissance mission. The creatures that had previously attacked in chaotic waves were now moving in coordinated formations, their actions synchronized as if controlled by a single mind. Her sniper, Corporal Davis, reported that the infected seemed to be communicating without sound, their movements perfectly timed despite being separated by hundreds of yards. The implications were terrifying. They were no longer fighting individuals but components of a collective intelligence. Dr. Chen's electromagnetic monitoring equipment registered the shift at exactly midnight Eastern Time. The frequency patterns emanating from the meteorite sites had suddenly harmonized, creating a unified signal that pulsed across the continent like a massive heartbeat. The infected individuals in her containment facility responded immediately, their previously erratic behavior becoming unnaturally calm and purposeful. They stood in perfect formation, their heads tilted at identical angles as if listening to instructions only they could hear. The underground resistance networks discovered the change the hard way. Maria Santos was leading a supply run through the Manhattan subway tunnels when her team encountered infected individuals who seemed to anticipate their every move. The creatures had positioned themselves at strategic choke points, forcing her group into predetermined paths like pieces on a chessboard. For the first time since the outbreak began, the infected appeared to be thinking several steps ahead, their traps so sophisticated that half her team barely escaped. General Morrison's Situation Room buzzed with alarming reports from military units worldwide. The infected weren't just coordinating locally, they were sharing information across vast distances instantaneously. An attack strategy that failed in Los Angeles was immediately countered by infected populations in Miami, as if the entire network had learned from a single engagement. The enemy was evolving at an unprecedented rate, adapting to human tactics faster than military strategists could develop new approaches. Dr. Webb's analysis of the meteorite composition revealed the horrifying truth about their origins. The rock samples contained crystalline structures that shouldn't exist in nature, arranged in patterns that resembled neural networks. Carbon dating was impossible because the materials seemed to exist outside normal temporal parameters, but spectral analysis matched no known stellar formations. The meteorites weren't from a dying star, they were artificial constructs, deliberately crafted and launched by an intelligence that had been planning this invasion for potentially millions of years. The first coordinated global assault began at dawn, synchronized across all time zones with military precision. In Tokyo, infected hordes moved through the city in perfect formations, their attack patterns designed to overwhelm specific defensive positions. London's underground evacuation routes were systematically cut off by infected individuals who seemed to understand the city's infrastructure better than its own residents. The same tactical awareness manifested simultaneously in dozens of major population centers, as if a single strategic mind was directing operations on every continent. Jake Martinez watched Chicago's skyline burn from his firehouse refuge, the infected having somehow coordinated arson attacks that targeted the city's emergency response capabilities. Fire stations, hospitals, and police headquarters were simultaneously overwhelmed by creatures that demonstrated an understanding of urban vulnerabilities that rivaled the most sophisticated military analysis. The attacks weren't random destruction. They were calculated moves designed to cripple humanity's ability to organize resistance. Captain Rodriguez's radio intercepted transmissions from military commands across the country, each reporting the same impossible phenomenon. The infected were no longer reacting to human actions, they were predicting them. Supply convoys were ambushed before they left their bases, evacuation routes were blocked before civilians could reach them, and defensive positions were infiltrated by infected individuals who seemed to possess detailed knowledge of military protocols and procedures. Dr. Chen's most disturbing discovery came when she attempted to trace the electromagnetic signals to their source. The transmissions weren't originating from the meteorite sites, they were coming from the infected themselves. The organisms had transformed their human hosts into components of a vast biological communication network, using human neural pathways as processing units for an alien intelligence that was literally thinking with thousands of hijacked human minds. The underground bunkers that had served as humanity's lifelines suddenly became death traps as infected individuals began appearing in supposedly secure locations. The creatures weren't breaking in, they were already inside, having infiltrated the facilities through maintenance tunnels and ventilation systems that they shouldn't have known existed. The hive mind had access to the memories and knowledge of every person it had consumed, creating a collective intelligence that understood human civilization better than humans understood themselves. As night fell across the devastated landscape, the true scope of the enemy's capabilities became clear. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting an intelligence that had turned their own species against them, creating an enemy that grew stronger with every victory and learned from every defeat. The sewers beneath Detroit had become humanity's new battlefield, where Sergeant Marcus Thompson led a squad of survivors through maintenance tunnels that reeked of decay and desperation. The surface world had fallen to the hive mind's coordinated assaults, leaving the underground networks as the last refuge for organized resistance. Thompson's unit moved in absolute silence, their boots wrapped in cloth to muffle footsteps, knowing that a single sound could alert the infected to their presence in the labyrinthine darkness below. Dr. Chen's breakthrough with sonic frequencies had reached the underground resistance through encrypted military channels, transmitted between bunkers using jury-rigged communication equipment. Her research revealed that specific sound waves could disrupt the electromagnetic signals binding the hive mind together, temporarily severing infected individuals from the collective consciousness. The discovery sparked hope among the survivors, but weaponizing sound waves in the confined spaces of tunnel systems presented enormous technical challenges. Engineer Lisa Park had been working for 72 hours straight in the abandoned subway station that served as the Eastern Command bunker, converting maintenance equipment into crude sonic weapons. The prototypes resembled oversized speakers mounted on wheeled platforms, their power cables snaking through the tunnel networks to generators hidden in ventilation shafts. The devices could theoretically incapacitate infected individuals within a 50-foot radius, but their effectiveness remained untested in actual combat conditions. The first major underground engagement occurred beneath Minneapolis, where Captain Rodriguez's forces encountered a coordinated infected assault on their primary food storage facility. The creatures had somehow mapped the tunnel system, approaching from multiple directions simultaneously in a pincer movement that threatened to overwhelm the defenders. Rodriguez ordered the deployment of Lisa's sonic weapons, their piercing frequencies echoing through the concrete corridors like the screams of electronic banshees. The results were both encouraging and terrifying. The infected individuals caught in the sonic field collapsed instantly, their bodies convulsing as the alien organisms temporarily lost control of their motor functions. But the hive mind adapted within minutes, sending waves of infected through alternate routes while the sonic weapons recharged. The battle became a deadly game of cat and mouse, with human defenders frantically repositioning their equipment while infected hordes pressed closer through the maze of interconnected passages. Maria Santos discovered the enemy's counter-strategy during a reconnaissance mission through the New York subway system. The infected had begun using the tunnel acoustics against the humans, creating sound traps where their collective clicking and scraping would echo through the passageways, masking their actual positions. Worse still, they were learning to navigate by touch and smell, reducing their dependence on sight and sound in ways that negated many of the humans' tactical advantages. The Battle of the Chicago Deep Tunnels became a turning point in the underground war. Jake Martinez coordinated a desperate defense of the city's primary water treatment facility, knowing that losing the pumping stations would leave the remaining survivors without clean water. The infected attacked in waves, their numbers seemingly endless as they poured through storm drains and maintenance access points. The sonic weapons proved effective in close quarters, but their limited range and recharge time made them insufficient against the overwhelming assault. Dr. Chen's field team made a crucial discovery while analyzing infected remains from the tunnel battles. The organisms were evolving protective mechanisms against the sonic frequencies, developing biological dampeners that reduced the effectiveness of the sound-based weapons. The adaptation rate was extraordinary. Infected individuals who survived sonic attacks for more than 30 seconds began showing resistance to the same frequencies within hours. The hive mind was literally learning to defend itself against humanity's most effective weapon. The infected's infiltration of the tunnel networks became increasingly sophisticated as they began using human knowledge of underground infrastructure. Former city engineers and utility workers, now part of the collective consciousness, provided the hive mind with detailed understanding of weak points in the resistance's defensive positions. Sealed blast doors were opened from within, ventilation systems were contaminated with infected biological matter, and communication cables were severed with surgical precision. Corporal Davis made the horrifying discovery that changed everything during a patrol beneath Boston. The infected weren't just using the tunnels for travel, they were expanding them. Using tools and coordinated labor, they had carved new passages that connected previously separate tunnel systems, creating a unified underground network that spanned multiple cities. The hive mind was literally reshaping the subterranean world to serve its tactical needs, demonstrating an engineering capability that rivaled human construction projects. The siege of the Atlanta medical bunker lasted 6 days, with infected forces systematically cutting off escape routes while Dr. Chen's team worked to develop countermeasures against the organism's sonic resistance. The battle showcased both human ingenuity and the hive mind's relentless adaptability, as each side developed new tactics in real time. The humans rigged explosive charges to collapse tunnel sections, while the infected used their growing numbers to absorb casualties and maintain pressure on defensive positions. As ammunition ran low and sonic weapons began failing against adapted infected, the survivors realized that the underground war was becoming unsustainable. The hive mind's ability to learn and adapt was outpacing human innovation, forcing the resistance to consider increasingly desperate measures. The tunnels that had once provided sanctuary were becoming tombs, and humanity needed a new strategy if they hoped to survive the intelligence that was systematically dismantling their last refuge. Dr. Foster's hands shook as she decoded the final sequence of alien genetic material, her computer screen displaying patterns that defied every principle of evolutionary biology she'd spent decades studying. The organisms weren't parasites seeking to destroy humanity, they were refugees from a dying civilization, using human bodies as vessels for their own desperate bid for survival. The revelation struck her like a physical blow, forcing her to confront the possibility that humanity was fighting not monsters, but another intelligent species facing extinction. The breakthrough came when Foster cross-referenced the alien genetic sequences with deep space radio telescope data from the past 50 years. The electromagnetic signatures that Dr. Chen had identified weren't just communication frequencies. They were distress calls, broadcast across the galaxy from a star system that had gone dark 3 centuries ago. The aliens had launched their meteorite arcs as a last resort, seeking any world capable of supporting their consciousness after their own planet became uninhabitable. Captain Rodriguez received Foster's encrypted transmission while coordinating defenses in the ruins of downtown Phoenix, where her forces had established a new stronghold after the tunnel networks became compromised. The scientific data painted a picture that challenged everything they thought they knew about their enemy. The infected weren't driven by mindless hunger, they were experiencing the trauma of an entire civilization compressed into individual human minds, their aggressive behavior stemming from the psychological horror of watching their species die. The alien memories began manifesting in unexpected ways among the infected populations. Dr. Webb documented cases where infected individuals displayed knowledge of advanced mathematics, stellar navigation, and technologies that humanity had never developed. The creatures weren't just using human bodies, they were inadvertently sharing fragments of their own civilization's accumulated knowledge, creating a bizarre form of cross-species information transfer that both fascinated and terrified the research teams. Maria Santos witnessed the phenomenon firsthand during a supply run through the abandoned Metropolitan Museum. She encountered an infected individual who had once been the museum's curator, now possessed by an alien consciousness that recognized the historical artifacts with impossible accuracy. The creature moved through the exhibits with reverent care, its alien intelligence appreciating human cultural achievements while simultaneously being trapped in a body that compelled it to hunt the living. The discovery split the remaining military leadership into 2 opposing factions. General Morrison, leading from the fortified NORAD facility, advocated for immediate deployment of biological weapons that would eliminate both the aliens and their human hosts. She argued that sentiment couldn't override survival, and that humanity's continued existence required the complete eradication of the alien threat regardless of the moral implications. General Marcus Hayes emerged as the voice of the opposing faction, broadcasting from a mobile command center that moved constantly to avoid detection. His forces had encountered infected individuals who showed signs of internal conflict, suggesting that both human and alien consciousnesses were struggling for control within the same bodies. Hayes believed that understanding the aliens' true nature might lead to a solution that could save both species from extinction. Dr. Chen's research team made a disturbing discovery while analyzing the alien genetic sequences. The organisms were designed to preserve not just alien consciousness, but human consciousness as well. The transformation process wasn't destroying human minds, it was archiving them, storing human memories and personalities in biological storage systems that the aliens had developed during their own species' decline. The infected humans were still alive somewhere within their transformed bodies, trapped but not destroyed. The philosophical implications tore through the survivor communities like wildfire. Jake Martinez found himself questioning whether their sonic weapons were liberation tools or instruments of genocide, while Lisa Park struggled with the knowledge that her engineering innovations might be destroying the remnants of two civilizations simultaneously. The moral complexity of the situation created fractures within resistance cells, as survivors grappled with fighting an enemy that might be as much victim as aggressor. Foster's final analysis revealed the aliens' ultimate intention: symbiosis rather than conquest. The genetic modifications weren't designed to replace human biology but to merge it with alien consciousness, creating a hybrid species that could survive in environments that would kill either species individually. The transformation process was flawed and traumatic, but its intended outcome was coexistence, not domination. The revelation came too late to prevent the first deployment of biological weapons by Morrison's faction. The modified virus spread through infected populations in the Pacific Northwest, causing mass casualties among both alien organisms and their human hosts. The attack succeeded in clearing large areas of infected individuals, but also eliminated any possibility of finding a cure for the transformation process. Captain Rodriguez watched the aftermath through satellite feeds, seeing the devastation that human desperation had wrought on an alien species that had sought refuge rather than conquest. The biological weapon had been effective, but its use had fundamentally changed the nature of the conflict. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival, they were fighting for the right to determine the fate of two species whose destinies had become inextricably linked. The war had evolved beyond a simple struggle between humans and infected. It had become a battle for the soul of two civilizations, where victory might require choosing between species survival and moral integrity, and where the definition of humanity itself hung in the balance. The civil war within humanity began with a single gunshot in the Colorado bunker complex, where Captain Rodriguez confronted General Morrison's forces over the deployment of additional biological weapons. The shot, fired by Morrison's aide during a heated argument about the fate of captured infected individuals, shattered the fragile unity that had held the survivors together. Within hours, the two factions had barricaded themselves in separate sections of the facility, their weapons now pointed at each other instead of their common enemy. Rodriguez's Cure faction had grown substantially after Dr. Foster's revelations, attracting scientists, medical personnel and survivors who believed that saving the infected humans was both morally necessary and scientifically possible. They established their headquarters in the former CDC facility outside Atlanta, where Dr. Chen's team worked around the clock to develop a process that could separate human consciousness from alien control without destroying either species. Their research showed promising results, but the procedure was complex and could only be performed on individual subjects. General Hayes commanded the Purge faction from a fortified position at Edwards Air Force Base, his forces swelled by military units who viewed the alien presence as an existential threat that required immediate elimination. Hayes had witnessed the biological weapon's effectiveness firsthand and argued that humanity couldn't afford to show mercy to invaders, regardless of their circumstances. His faction had superior firepower and military training, but they lacked the scientific expertise needed to develop more sophisticated weapons. The first major confrontation between the human factions occurred in the ruins of Dallas, where both groups had converged to secure a cache of medical supplies. Rodriguez's forces attempted to capture infected individuals for their research, while Hayes' troops were under orders to eliminate any alien presence they encountered. The battle raged for 6 hours through the abandoned city streets, with both sides suffering casualties while the infected observed from the shadows with growing intelligence. Dr. Chen's breakthrough came during the height of the human conflict, when she successfully separated an alien consciousness from its human host for the first time. The procedure required precise electromagnetic field manipulation combined with surgical intervention, and the results were both miraculous and heartbreaking. The human subject, a former teacher named David Park, retained his memories and personality but bore the psychological scars of sharing his mind with an alien intelligence for months. The alien consciousness, preserved in a specially designed containment field, attempted to communicate with the research team through a series of complex electromagnetic pulses. Dr. Foster's translation efforts revealed a narrative of desperate survival and profound regret. The aliens had never intended to cause harm, but their dying civilization had given them no choice except to seek refuge in human bodies. The communication carried emotional weight that transcended species barriers, describing the agony of watching their homeworld burn while fleeing through the void of space. Meanwhile, the hive mind had been learning from humanity's internal conflict, studying their tactics and adapting its own strategies accordingly. The infected began employing divide-and-conquer techniques, launching coordinated attacks that forced the human factions to choose between helping each other or maintaining their ideological positions. The alien intelligence demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of human psychology, exploiting the survivors' emotional vulnerabilities with precision that rivaled their tactical capabilities. Jake Martinez found himself caught between the two factions when his Chicago stronghold was simultaneously approached by both Cure and Purge forces seeking his allegiance. The choice tore at his conscience. He had witnessed the humanity that still existed within some infected individuals, but he had also seen the devastation that the alien presence had brought to his city. His decision to remain neutral made him a target for both sides, forcing him to defend his position against humans who had once been his allies. The alien consciousness achieved a crucial breakthrough when it learned to exert direct control over the infected masses, overriding their previous reliance on electromagnetic coordination. The hive mind began demonstrating tactical brilliance that exceeded human military doctrine, launching simultaneous attacks on both faction strongholds while they were distracted by their internal conflict. The aliens had transformed from desperate refugees into skilled strategists, using humanity's own divisions against them. Dr. Chen's second successful separation procedure yielded disturbing results when the freed human subject retained fragments of alien memories and knowledge. The psychological integration was so complete that true separation might be impossible. The two species had become fundamentally intertwined at a cellular level. The revelation forced Rodriguez to confront the possibility that saving the infected might require accepting permanent changes to human biology and consciousness. The siege of the Atlanta CDC facility became a three-way battle as Hayes' forces attempted to destroy Chen's research while infected hordes pressed their attack from all directions. The facility's laboratories contained the only hope for a cure, but they also housed alien specimens that Hayes viewed as immediate threats to human survival. The battle's outcome would determine not just the fate of the cure research, but the future relationship between the human factions. As the infected forces demonstrated increasingly sophisticated tactics, including the use of captured human weapons and coordinated psychological warfare, both human factions began to realize that their internal conflict had given the aliens the advantage they needed to complete their conquest. The war for humanity's future had become a race against time, with survival depending on whether the species could overcome their differences before the alien intelligence achieved total dominance. The atmospheric processors began their work at dawn, massive alien constructs that had risen from the Earth overnight like metallic mountains, their crystalline surfaces humming with the same electromagnetic frequencies that bound the hive mind together. Dr. Webb watched in horror from his observation post as the sky above Denver shifted from blue to a sickly green hue, the alien machines systematically converting Earth's atmosphere into something that could sustain their species while slowly poisoning human lungs. The transformation was proceeding faster than anyone had anticipated, giving humanity perhaps weeks before the air itself became lethal. The emergence of the atmospheric processors forced an immediate ceasefire between the warring human factions, their ideological differences suddenly rendered meaningless by the prospect of planetary extinction. Captain Rodriguez and General Hayes met in the ruins of Kansas City, their representatives negotiating frantically while alien spores drifted through the contaminated air like toxic snow. The emergency summit lasted 12 hours, with both leaders recognizing that their species' survival now depended on the same cooperation that had seemed impossible just days earlier. Dr. Chen's bioweapon represented humanity's last hope, but the moral weight of its deployment threatened to tear apart the fragile alliance before it could be implemented. The weapon was designed to target the alien organisms at a genetic level, but its effectiveness would require eliminating every infected individual on the planet simultaneously. The cure research had shown that human consciousness could survive within infected bodies, meaning that deployment would essentially murder thousands of people to save millions more. The alien consciousness had anticipated humanity's final desperation, positioning its most valuable assets, infected individuals who retained clear fragments of their human personalities, at strategic locations where their destruction would inflict maximum psychological damage on the human forces. Maria Santos encountered her own sister among the infected defending the New York atmospheric processor, the recognition hitting her like a physical blow as she realized that saving the world would require killing the person she'd spent months trying to rescue. General Morrison's suicide bombing of the Chicago processor provided the first proof that the alien constructs could be destroyed, but her sacrifice also revealed the true scope of the challenge facing humanity. The explosion had only damaged the facility, not destroyed it, and the alien intelligence had immediately begun repairs using infected workers who seemed immune to radiation and toxic exposure. The processors were heavily defended and built with redundant systems that made them nearly indestructible through conventional military action. The breakthrough came when Dr. Foster discovered that the atmospheric processors were directly connected to the hive mind's communication network, their operations coordinated through the same electromagnetic frequencies that controlled the infected masses. If they could disrupt the network while simultaneously deploying the bioweapon, they might be able to destroy both the alien intelligence and its terraforming capabilities in a single coordinated strike. The plan required perfect timing and would depend on survivors at 12 different locations acting in precise synchronization. Jake Martinez volunteered to lead the assault on the Detroit processor, knowing that his position at the heart of the Midwest communication network made his mission critical to the overall plan. His team included survivors from both factions, their previous enmity replaced by grim determination as they prepared for what would likely be a one-way mission. The infected forces defending the processor had grown increasingly sophisticated, using human military tactics combined with alien coordination to create defensive positions that seemed impregnable. The final assault began at exactly noon Eastern Time, with human forces launching simultaneous attacks on all 12 atmospheric processors while Dr. Chen's team prepared to broadcast the bioweapon from the CDC facility. The coordination required split-second timing, as the alien intelligence would adapt quickly once it recognized the threat. Rodriguez led the charge against the Colorado processor while Hayes commanded the assault on the California facility, their former rivalry transformed into seamless military cooperation. The alien consciousness revealed its final strategy as the human attacks intensified, using infected children as human shields around the critical processor components. The psychological warfare was devastating, forcing human soldiers to choose between completing their mission and protecting the innocent lives that the aliens had weaponized against them. The hive mind had learned to exploit humanity's greatest strength, their compassion, as their ultimate weakness. Dr. Chen's finger hovered over the broadcast trigger as reports flooded in from the assault teams. Half the processors had been severely damaged, but the others remained operational and were accelerating their atmospheric conversion in response to the attacks. The bioweapon would take several minutes to spread globally, and the aliens were using that time to complete as much terraforming as possible before their inevitable destruction. The moment of decision arrived when Lisa Park's engineering team breached the core of the Atlanta processor, revealing infected individuals who were clearly struggling against their alien control, their human consciousness fighting desperately to break free. Some appeared to be winning the internal battle, their actions protecting human attackers rather than defending the alien facility. The revelation forced everyone to confront the possibility that the infection might be reversible without the bioweapon, but only if they could survive long enough to develop a more sophisticated cure. As the atmospheric processors continued their deadly work and the bioweapon awaited deployment, humanity faced its ultimate test of character, forced to choose between guaranteed survival through genocide and uncertain hope through mercy. The silence that followed Dr. Chen's decision to halt the bioweapon deployment was deafening, broken only by the labored breathing of survivors watching infected individuals across the globe suddenly collapse as their internal battle reached its climax. David Park, the first successfully separated human, had broadcast a desperate plea through the alien communication network, urging his fellow infected to resist their alien controllers. The response was extraordinary. Thousands of infected individuals began fighting against their own programming, their human consciousness finally strong enough to challenge the alien presence within their minds. Maria Santos watched in amazement as her sister Sandra emerged from the infected masses defending the New York processor, her eyes clearing as human awareness returned. The transformation wasn't complete. Sandra's movements remained slightly mechanical, and her speech carried an otherworldly cadence. But her personality, her memories, and her love for her sister had survived the months of alien control. The reunion was bittersweet, as Sandra retained fragments of alien memories that would forever change her understanding of the universe and humanity's place within it. The atmospheric processors began shutting down one by one as the infected workers responsible for their operation turned against their alien masters. The hive mind's greatest strength, its unified consciousness, became its fatal weakness when human willpower proved stronger than alien control. Jake Martinez coordinated the systematic dismantling of the Detroit facility, working alongside former infected individuals who possessed both human determination and alien technical knowledge, creating an unprecedented collaboration between species. Dr. Foster's analysis of the liberation process revealed that the separation wasn't clean or complete. The humans who had broken free from alien control retained portions of the alien consciousness within their neural pathways, creating a new form of hybrid intelligence that combined human emotion and creativity with alien logic and scientific understanding. These individuals represented something entirely new, a bridge between species that had emerged from the crucible of desperate survival. Captain Rodriguez faced the most difficult decision of the war when she encountered thousands of infected individuals who remained under alien control, their human consciousness too deeply buried to achieve liberation. The bioweapon could still eliminate them, but doing so would also destroy the aliens who had never chosen to become invaders. Her choice to establish containment facilities rather than proceed with mass elimination defined humanity's moral character in its darkest hour, proving that compassion could survive even the threat of extinction. The alien consciousness that remained, severed from its hive mind network, revealed itself to be profoundly different when isolated in Dr. Chen's laboratory containment field. Without the collective support of its species, the individual alien intelligence displayed what could only be described as grief, mourning for its dead homeworld, its lost civilization, and the unintended suffering it had caused to humanity. The communication attempts that followed were heartbreaking in their simplicity, as the alien entity tried to express concepts of sorrow and regret that transcended language barriers. General Hayes led the establishment of the first integrated communities, where liberated humans and contained aliens worked together to repair the atmospheric damage and rebuild civilization. The process was fraught with tension and mistrust, but the shared experience of survival had created bonds that overcame species differences. The hybrid individuals served as interpreters and mediators, their unique perspective allowing them to bridge the gap between human and alien worldviews. The reconstruction efforts revealed the true extent of the alien scientific knowledge, as liberated infected individuals retained understanding of technologies that could revolutionize human civilization. Clean energy systems, advanced materials science, and interstellar communication techniques became available to humanity, but only through cooperation with the very species they had been fighting. The moral complexity of the situation forced survivors to confront their assumptions about conquest, survival, and the nature of intelligence itself. Dr. Chen's final report documented the emergence of a new form of consciousness that neither species had anticipated: children born to liberated humans who carried traces of alien genetic modification. These offspring displayed enhanced cognitive abilities and an intuitive understanding of both human emotion and alien logic, representing the next evolutionary step for both species. They were neither fully human nor fully alien, but something entirely unprecedented in the galaxy's history. The memorial service held on the first anniversary of the outbreak's end honored both human and alien casualties, acknowledging the tragic cost of first contact between two desperate civilizations. The ceremony was conducted in both languages, human speech and the electromagnetic pulses that had once controlled the hive mind, as survivors from both species mourned their losses and celebrated their survival. The infected who had died during the liberation process were remembered as heroes who had sacrificed themselves to free their minds from alien control. As the sun set over the rebuilt city of Atlanta, now home to both human and alien refugees, Captain Rodriguez reflected on the war that had transformed two species forever. Humanity had survived its greatest test not through superior firepower or scientific advancement, but through the decision to show mercy when extinction seemed inevitable. The world that emerged from the ashes was scarred but hopeful, populated by humans who had learned that survival sometimes required embracing the unknown rather than destroying it. The future belonged to neither species alone, but to the hybrid civilization they would build together among the stars.